Okay, here's a quick video just to show the process, once again, of how to measure and draw out your slices or cross sections of your design. Okay, so you'll remember my demo piece that I started in class that I've shown you a bunch of times. Remember on my drawings, I labeled them X and Y, and I can label my silhouettes that I've cut out of my model as well. So I'll label this, because it lines up here. I'll label this one X. And this one goes here, so this will be Y. You can call it A and B, front and side, whatever you want to call it. I've also numbered all of my spaces. So I have 1 inch between each of my spaces, and I've numbered them all, so I have 12 on both drawings. And then I've already made my base, which is just, in this case, an elliptical piece, because I started out with this line pretty much in the center of both my drawings where these intersect. What gets tricky is where it starts going off center, where it's asymmetrical. Notice that this distance here is shorter than this distance here, and especially in the middle here where it really pinches in, I've got a really short distance over here versus a much longer distance. So it's really sort of more extremely asymmetrical. So I'll just quickly demonstrate drawing out the shape and making a template for a couple of those pieces. So why don't I start with number 3 here? So that's this line here, number 3. Make sure you can see that. Here's number 3 on my X direction. And I know in all of my in-class demonstrations, I've been using inches, and I got home and realized that the only ruler I could find has only centimeters on it, unless I use my level, which has inches and centimeters. So I'll do this in centimeters, which maybe some of you will find easier. Centimeters are nice because they're decimal based. They're easy to multiply and divide with a calculator. So I'll start with piece number 3 here. And this ruler is kind of funny because at every 10 centimeters, it starts over again at 1. So this is 10, 11, 12 and a half, 12 and a half centimeters. So I'm going to label this my X direction, and I'm going to just make a line at the edge of my paper here. And that's going to be 12 and a half centimeters long. And then because this is asymmetrical, I want to measure where the two axes on my thing intersect. So I'm going to measure how far over that goes. So that is 5.12 centimeters, 5.2 centimeters. I'm just going to mark that 5.12. And I can barely see that little mark on the ruler with my failing eyesight. All right, so I'm doing number 3 over here as well. So this one, make sure you guys can see that in the camera view. Got too many papers in a small table space. This one is 9.5 centimeters, 9.5. So that's going to go in this direction, in my Y axis, 9.5. And I can put my 9.5 over here so that I have a box sort of describing the entire proportional space of that. And I'll connect it over here. Looks like I didn't draw this one line very square. So let's just double check that measurement and re-square it. So that was 12 and a half. 12 and a half over here. It's probably close enough. Okay, so then I want to see if this is centered on my Y direction. So let's label that before I forget. Here's Y, goes with this direction here. So in that direction, we had 9.5, and then this line is at 5.12, 5.2, which is pretty close to centered. No, it's not. It's actually fairly off from centered, sorry. So that's 5.12 right there. And I'll mark that over here as well, just so I can draw that line, 5.2. Cool. And so most of you already started accounting for the thickness of your material, right? And that's 1/8 of an inch. In centimeters, that's about 0.3 centimeters, which is 3 millimeters. All these individual pieces, individual markings are 0.1 centimeter or 1 millimeter. So that's pretty small. So that's half of 3 millimeters is going to be 1.5 millimeters on either side of my line. So I'm going to count over 1, and then just do like in between two of these marks here. And then 1, so 1.5. And I'll do the same in this direction. 1, and then another half. 1 and another half. My pencil is almost not sharp enough to even draw that small of a increment. So don't worry too much if you're getting super accurate with this. Once you get to the scroll saw, you can adjust and sand things down if things are off by a little bit. All right, so there's the part that I'm going to cut out. So then if you remember, because this is asymmetrical, I'm not going to have just a straight ellipse anymore. I'm going to have a curve that's sort of off center. So the biggest thing with this curve, remember, is to make it curvy enough. I know it seems obvious, silly to say, but don't make it too pointed at the corners. Try to make it flow nicely all the way around so it feels like it's one shape versus being divided into, you know, if I make this kind of pointy at the corners, ends up looking more like a lemon, you know, like a lemon would have like a point at either end versus an orange is a little bit more round. So I don't want it to look like that. I don't want it to look like 4 separate pieces. I want it to look like it's one continuous piece. Okay, so here's my X direction over here going along this direction. Here's my Y direction over here going this way. And I did my measurement going across the X, my measurement going across the Y, and then I measured how far over in space my piece is divided, right? So I've got the overall dimension, and then I've got that cross section where the two pieces intersect at that point. Okay. I'll do one more quick one, just because I know some of you like to see this multiple times, which I totally get. It takes a little bit of time to wrap your head around the complexity of this. I'll skip up to number 6 here. So again, I'm going to measure the overall dimension in my X direction. This is 8.3. I'll just continue right along next to this one on the same line. 8.3. And then I'm going to measure where that line intersects. So that is 2.2. And then over on this drawing, in the Y direction, I have 5.4 centimeters. And 5.4. Connect those lines together. And then in my Y direction, I forgot to measure the middle line. That is at 2.3. 2.3. So keep in mind that because these are asymmetrical, I'm sure you guys can see this, sorry. If these are asymmetrical, if I flip this by mistake and do it backwards, right, and put this symmetry line, or this cross section I should say, if I put it on the wrong side, it's just going to make my piece upside down. So then when I cut this out of my chipboard on the scroll saw and I cut my 4 segments, it'll just be upside down. And that doesn't matter because the chipboard is the same on both sides. So that sometimes can be confusing, I'm sure, because you forget which direction, left or right, they need to go, these measurements need to go in. So if some of you I noticed were labeling A, B, C, D, or whatever. If that helps you remember the orientation, that's great. If not, just keep these 4 together, and then just know that when you put it together, when you go to glue it, you just have to try them and maybe flip them the other way. I noticed that some people were running into that today in class. So you can easily flip them around the other direction. So I'll just draw this second piece here. Trying to keep my curves nice and rounded again. Approximately like that, right? So not pinched in, but nice and rounded. Imagine blowing up a balloon so that it really fills the space and is nice and rounded in there. So that is on my drawing, or on my model here. This is number 3. And then this is number 6. So you can kind of look at it, notice that 6 is much narrower than 3, so that makes sense. 3 needs to be wider. We want to follow the curve of our design. Now, some of you have more complex contours. Like if you had a flat surface going across at an angle, that is going to be a little bit different. That piece will sort of, if I were to cut this top section off at an angle, this piece, instead of being just one round ellipse, I'm going to end up measuring that. This would be if the top of my design were cut off at a little angle. I'm going to measure across here, and that's 7 centimeters the way I've drawn it here. And then I've got 2.5 centimeters is where my center line is, or dividing line. It's not right in the center. And then on this one, 11, piece 11, this is, I'm just kind of modifying my design quickly on the go, just as an example of what this could look like if I did a different top to it. So this is 11 and a half. I don't know if I left myself room here. Half of 11 and a half is 5 3/4, so I don't have quite enough room. So I'm going to go down this direction. And maybe I'm going to draw this over here. 11 and a half. And what did I say this was? It was 7. There's my 7. I think it's Natalia had a top to her design that was sort of like this, with a slanted cut. So this is 2.5. Where my center line is. And then on this drawing, I've got 4.5 over. That's where my intersection is. Okay, and I'll draw that, and then I'll draw this. All right, so in this case, because it's cut off at a slant, anyone that doesn't have this sort of cut off slant thing, ignore this part. But if you have some sort of a flat surface going angled across like that, it's going to be flat going in this direction, right? Sorry, I moved my hand over so you can see better. It's going to be flat going front to back across there. This is like a flat surface. So I want my actual slice to represent that. So in this case, it's just going to be straight across this front part. Notice that this is where the shorter side is. So it's going to be just straight, and then the back side will be curved. And then the front will just be straight across. Could be that you want it to curve in a little bit towards the front. In fact, you probably do want to do that. It just will look, it'll flow a little bit nicer if you kind of do that, and then you have it just straight across here. So that's the straight part goes across. If I were to line it up, it's going to cut right across there on piece 11. So it's going to be straight on the front, across here, and then curved on the back of my piece. So that's just how you do if you have a little diagonal cut. Okay, there are a couple examples. I will see you when I'm back. Thanks, guys. Good luck.